Welcome to Global Tax Talks, being filmed at our European Global Tax Symposium in Lisbon. I'm delighted to be joined today by Edwin Visser. Edwin is our Deputy Global Tax Policy Leader. Edwin, welcome.
Good morning, Will.
Good. So let's talk a little about Europe, and particularly about the European Commission, because we've had elections this year to the Parliament. We're now looking at a new Commission, but there's a very complicated, some might say overly complex process for getting commissioners in place in order to form a new Commission. So we've had people proposed. Something strange seems to have happened with the tax portfolio, and we now have a process which involves votes and then the formation of the Commission. So perhaps you could just explain to us a little where we are and what we can expect to see by the end of the year.
Yeah, maybe I should back it up a little bit. We had elections of the European Parliament 24th of June this year. Shortly after that, European leaders nominated Ms. von der Leyen as the president of the new Commission. She was approved by the Parliament, and then she presented the Commission as designate on 17 September, 27 of them. And they go to a process of hearings and approvals by the European Parliament. Right. And that went quite well for the first 20 of them. The 6 vice presidents was a bit more troublesome. And until yesterday, I must say, we didn't expect the Commission to start at 1st of December because the European People's Party was blocking the appointment of Ms. Ribera, the vice president, and the Social Democrats were blocking the Italian candidate and the Hungarian candidate. But yesterday evening, a deal was struck between the European People's Party and the Social Democrats. So now I think it will be possible that the Commission will start on the 1st of December. And of course, there will be a plenary vote in the Parliament on 27th, 28th of November. That of course has to be passed. And if that is successful, then they can start working on the 1st of December. That doesn't mean that we have a work program yet. That's something we will not see before March next year, we expect. And then you said it's complicated, the tax portfolio. Well, we have 3 commissioners, I think, being involved in tax. The primary responsibility is with Mr. Hoekstra, former Minister of Finance of the Netherlands. There's no tax in his title. He's the Commissioner for Climate, Net Zero and Clean Growth. But when you look at the mission letters, there's a lot of tax issues, tax policy engagements in that. Then you have Valdis Dombrovskis, the Commissioner designate for Economy and Productivity, Implementation and Simplification. He's partly responsible for some tax issues. And then you have Ms. Ribera, the Spanish Vice President. She also has some tax issues in her mission letter. How that will play out is not clear yet. It could be an attempt by Ms. von der Leyen to make sure that the various commissioners work together on tax policy. It could also be a divide and rule policy. Not sure what it is. If you're skeptical, cynical, you would say the last maybe.
Right. So just one quick follow-up from that, because at least for the last couple of commissions, the tax portfolio has also been held by the Economy Minister. So the Economy Minister is the one, Economy Commissioner, who's also the one who goes to the G7, to the G20, and obviously to the European ECOFIN. It doesn't sound like any of these people is necessarily going to hold that. So does that mean that tax is diminished in a way?
I'm not sure. It's hard to tell at this moment. When you look at the mission letters, well, there's a lot of ambition in it, I think. When you look at the hearings and written questions and answers of the last period, well, it's the traditional focus. And if you would ask me what's the overall impression you get, then it's more aimed at revenue raising than at supporting competitiveness. Which is a pity, despite all the reports, Draghi, etc. Yeah. And your question about who will represent the Commission at the G20, well, it's expected that that will be Mr. Dombrovskis, but again, that's a bit unclear yet.
Great. Okay, well, let's move on from that to sort of the next, in a sense, more interesting question, which is, what does this mean tax-wise? What does, is there do the letters say anything about what tax policy should be? Do we have ideas about what the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years might look like?
Yeah, we have some idea based on the mission letters and the hearings. I think a priority is simplification and decluttering, as the new buzzword is. That's high ambition, and the Commission is already taking stock of potential decluttering measures. They do that in the platform for tax good governance. But, and that's the caveat I saw in the hearings, I heard in the hearings, that Mr. Hoekstra said, well, of course we will do an analysis, we'll present that in 2026. But the gaps could also mean that we need stronger provisions. That was the first caveat. Dombrovskis said, well, decluttering and simplification does not mean deregulation, which I find odd because the ambition of the Commission is to have 25% less rules for business in order to make the business climate better in Europe. So that is one. I hope that they will make a step towards simplification. It's really necessary. Yeah. But in some instances that needs to be done at the global level too, because the European Commission cannot do that on its own, I think. There's strong support still for the two pillars by both Hoekstra and Dombrovskis. Hoekstra supports a digital tax when Pillar 1 fails. He still uses the word if Pillar 1 fails. But he wants to do it in cooperation with the US, and he wants a common approach in the EU and not every member state doing that on its own. That will be quite difficult, I think. What's surprising to me is that he sort of doubled down on the undertaxed profits rule, saying, well, if there's circumvention of Pillar 2 or inaccurate reporting, then the UTPR is an important backstop. That's what we got from the hearing. I didn't hear him say anything about the possible ramifications if EU member states would start applying the UTPR towards US multinationals. Indeed. And certainly with Trump, I think, but we'll get back to that later, there will be ramifications and retaliation probably if that would happen. UNSHL, still strong support for that, echoed by Mr. Hoekstra, which I find a bit surprising, also in the light of the new ambitions on competitiveness. As you know, the UNSHL definition of a special purpose vehicle is very broad. Yep. And if you want to attract investment towards Europe, well, some investors use typical structures with SPVs, so that doesn't match in my point of view. But of course, the UNSHL directive is under discussion. The Hungarian presidency will not carry that over the line, and it may end up in a exchange of information rule, maybe a DAC 10 directive. Both Hoekstra and Dombrovskis echoed support for the initiative of the G20 to design, so to say, a global wealth tax. I think that the genie is a bit out of the bottle. I don't think there will be a global wealth tax, but it will trigger some countries, I think, to start implementing that. Hoekstra is also in favor of global standards for carbon pricing. He didn't say how he does want to achieve that. And interesting also for tax professionals is the state aid portfolio, of course. That's in the hands of Ms. Ribera. And she said that she wants to use the state aid instrument strategically to support decarbonization and to roll out the clean technology. Good. When you look at the mission letters, there's some words about tax incentive support for clean tech industries. I haven't seen anything back in the hearings or in the Q&A, but that's an important one for business to look out for. Yeah. Is there really going to be an initiative to support via the tax system the rollout of a clean tech industry in Europe? Maybe let's stop here.
Interesting, yes. So you mentioned you had a question for me.
Yes, of course. We all saw the results of the US elections. Mr. Trump did win in all the swing states, so he's going to be the next president. What do you expect will be the implications for international tax policy with Mr. Trump at the helm?
It's the safe answer is it's very hard to tell because we don't know what the policy is going to be. And again, as I say to everybody, the biggest tax event in the US next year is an internal one. It's the reauthorization of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017, and everything will be focused on that. So what goes on in the international sphere, to a certain extent, will play second fiddle to that. It'll be less important. Nevertheless, as you know, there has been a lot of attention in the US Congress. Both houses are now going to be Republican about the OECD project, and there is an awareness that the UTPR will bite at the end of 2025. I mean, it'll become, in effect, cross-chain from 1/1/25, so not very long, but as it relates to the ultimate parent entity. So there's going to have to be some resolution of that. What that resolution looks like is unclear, and as I've said before, not a resolution which happens in Paris, that has to happen in Brussels. because of the structure of the directive. So there's that. I mean, you talk about things like global wealth tax. The US has been ambivalent about that, even under the Biden administration. I would expect it to be at least as ambivalent under a new Republican administration. And likewise, there's been talk about defunding the OECD. That may be a little overheated. That wouldn't, even if it happened, wouldn't take effect for at least a year. But clearly there is going to be a different position to both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 at the OECD. We also have to take into account tariffs. Now, we don't know what the tariffs are going to be, how high they're going to be, who they're going to affect in particular, but obviously those can confuse the tax situation because there's a connection between the two of those. And again, we just have to watch and see. But if the tariffs are quite high, then one could expect to see retaliatory tariffs. And if we then get into a trade war, that makes solving some of the tax issues
more difficult,
much harder. So again, it's an uncertain situation for all multinational businesses, both US outbound, but also businesses which have to, non-US headquartered businesses which have to deal with the US. So I think the safest advice is watch and see. We'll have a clearer picture probably by sort of March. But for the moment,
Tax Foundation, the think tank in the US, summed up the consequences for the EU as follows: tariffs, DST retaliation, UTPR retaliation, and CBAM retaliation. Would you agree with that short list? It's a shortcut, of course, but
let me say that I remain eternally hopeful. So I hope that's
I'm optimistic too. But
I hope that's a pessimistic shortlist. Anyway, look, Edwin, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to have you, and of course we'll have you back again. And thank you for joining us, and come back again next time so that you stay global tax ready.